Hello and welcome to Coffee with Candice. I'm your host, Candice Mama. Today's guest is one of the most inspiring women I've had the honor of coming across. Her name is Carley Page Summers. She's an interior photographer and stylist. Her work has been featured in Architectural Digest and later this year will be featured in Condé Nast Traveler. I am so excited to be having this interview because Carly's story is absolutely phenomenal. So, before we get into it, if you like this podcast, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Without further ado, here's Carly. Hello.
I am like by no means a technology expert. And I even brought coffee because I thought it was
Thank you so much. Thank you.
good. Thank you for having me.
Oh, Carly, thank you so much for being here. I know you're in the middle of a move and renovations. So I am so honored that in between all of that hecticness, you made time.
Well, you know what? We are learning to prioritize things that matter. And I was reading a lot about you, and just like reconciliation and forgiveness is such a huge part of like my own personal story. So I just think people need more of it. So I was like, this is something that's like pulls at my heartstrings. So I want to like pause life and like tap into that kind of stuff. So this was good for me.
Oh man, that means so much to me because I was going through Instagram. Of course, I was a fan because I was just like, your like pictures just speak to my soul. Your spaces, just like, oh, I'm like, I feel at home in your Instagram. And I remember I was scrolling through and I think it was your birthday post. And I just decided, let me read what you have to say. So I'm like reading through it and it just struck me. Like, Carly, I just sat there for a second and I was like, wow. And I thought it was both beautiful and brave. And I love that you shared it with so, like, you didn't share it with shame, but it was so helpful. And for those people who haven't read your post, like, would you mind just telling us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I love we're like getting into it. And so I think I have like a couple posts that I like kind of talk about my journey, but I guess was it my like actual birthday or like my sober birthday?
No, I think it was your actual birthday.
Okay, so um I think what I try to present on Instagram and like a part of my journey, I'm 9 years sober. And I think a lot of times you would look at my Instagram and you would not, I don't look like the typical, recovering alcoholic drug addict. I don't think we have the stigma of what those people look like. And don't get me wrong, 9 years ago, I was very rough around the edges, really struggled through addiction and all of that. But on that post, I just shared, I think sometimes people will look at my Instagram and be like, wow, like look at these like luxury homes and all these things that you get to do. And I mean, I can remember 9 years ago, like sleeping on a mattress on the floor in like a roach infested house and like being on like a computer and a roach crawling, and just, I mean, there's people with way worse circumstances than that, but I can remember being at the lowest point of my life and then now coming into these kind of luxury style homes and designing them, and the juxtaposition of like almost homelessness to creating sacred spaces, which is like really important to me. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the journey. I mean, there's a lot in between that happened, and I could go on and on about my own personal testimony, but I was actually reading about you this morning and I was getting weepy, just what you've walked through in your life. And I literally prayed before we got on the call that I would not be a water well because I cry so easily. I'm a very emotional person. But I was reading about your story and just how you were able to like reconcile and forgive. And I've had to do that in my own personal life. And it's something I don't share on social media. But when I was in college, I was a victim of rape. And I forgave that person and I released them. And I was able to do that through sexual abuse therapy. And when I was able to do that, I no longer had to carry them around with me. And I loved what you wrote. You said you set them free and then it set you free. And so I was reading what you wrote this morning and just the freedom in that. And I just so bonded with what you had to say. And, I don't share about that on social media because I do think that is kind of like a little bit more like of a one-on-one thing. But that's what started my drug and alcohol heavy addiction, because I was trying to numb myself. But yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful testimony. I'm so grateful for what God's done in my life and having opportunities like this and speaking with such incredible women like you. So, I mean, but that's kind of part of the story, and that's kind of where I've come from. And it's taken me 9 years to build this business, and I love that I get to like sit around beautiful women every day. I started my photography journey when I was living in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. I lived there for 6 months as a missionary, and I got there straight out of rehab. I got on a plane and moved straight to Haiti. And I fell in love with the people and the culture and serving. And I realized that what I had walked through in my life could also help other people. And that's the first time I shared about my assault. And then the women in Haiti go through, you know, it's a third world country, what they go through and the suffering they go through, the oppression, you know, even my small glimpse of what I went through in college was able to bring hope to them, that they could like push through it. And so like God just started to work in my life while I was in Haiti. I picked up a camera, I started photographing and telling stories. And so that's just kind of, I've always been a storyteller. And so I think that's just kind of factored into my business. And so like when you say you see the homes and you feel comfort, I'm just trying to tell a story. So that's just like a little bit about me, but.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And you shared so much. And I feel like there's so much to unpack in every little, you know, story you've shared within that. And I think I want to go back to, you know, the forgiveness element and the carrying of resentment and what that really does to the human body and to the psyche overall. For me, I learned that also firsthand. I ended up going more towards the route of self-inflicted punishment. So, you know, eating, I was punishing myself through food. I was a competitive athlete and I just would punish myself consistently. And it was only when I forgave that I realized, whoa, this thing had so much power. It had so much power, right? And speaking about your journey of, you know, going towards, you know, addiction and walking that road and then coming out of it, I want to touch on that a little bit because I think there's so many people out there that are suffering, that are going through some sort of an addiction, and they thinking to themselves, but how did you do it? Like, how did you go from, you know, cockroaches walking over you to, you know, who you are today?
You know, it's interesting, that question I pose a lot in my own mind, because now, do I still struggle sometimes with like wanting to have a glass of wine and unwind at the end of the day? Yes, I'm a human. I want to escape my own reality, which is what I was doing with my addiction. I was escaping what had happened to me. I was escaping the facts. I wanted to escape it. And so that's what I was doing during that time. But I'll tell you, you know, I got sober at 22 years old, which I think is pretty young. And what I had to do, which was hard, was surrender really everything that tied me to that addiction. And that's hard for people to do. They go, I want to let it go, but I want to keep this. I want to continue to move forward, but I want to keep this person. I want to move forward and be free, but I want to keep this chain. And I, at that time, realized I have to literally use the hand of God to unshackle all these chains and literally walk in freedom. Like, have you ever heard that analogy of like if you don't want to carry baggage, like drop the luggage? Like, it's like, just drop it. You know, like if you don't want to carry it anymore, you're going to have to put it all down. And so at 22 years old, I surrendered like every idea I had of my life. Every friend at that moment, I had to just separate myself with. Every place, every person, everything, I had to surrender it all. Now, that was one of the most painful moments of my life. But I'll tell you what, some of those things that I had to surrender, like friends and things like that, have come back around and have joined me on this journey. And it's been the sweetest thing. And what God intended for you to let go can bring back and redeem and restore those things. You know, it's not a forever. But I think that's what I would have to tell people, is that if you want freedom, you have to take what's hiding in the darkness and give it over to the light and like set it free and like not walk in it anymore. You have to like let it all go, you know, and it's tough. I mean, I'm sure in your own experience, that was so hard.
The way you put that, I think, is so beautiful. And it comes back to something I found very interesting about your posts, your sharing when I read your interviews or listen to them, is your relationship with shame. It it's a beautiful one. It's a healthy one, because I think so many of us live in shame. We keep those dark secrets and we don't want to put them into the light. We're like, oh no, like, it's like your deep, dark secret. And what we don't realize is they control us. Because when you're so ashamed of a part of yourself or something, then you act in that shame, and you're so afraid of anyone else knowing that shame. And you speak so beautifully about God. And I want to know, how did these two things coincide? You bringing out, this darkness into the light at the same time as walking with God.
Well, I'll take you back to that moment that, I said where I was assaulted in college. And then when that act happened to me, I didn't deserve it, which is something I had to process. It wasn't my fault. But in that moment when it happened, almost the morning after, directly after, I had a seed planted inside of me that I was worthless, that I deserved it, that you should be ashamed of yourself. You put yourself in that situation. So I carried for 5 years this idea that you deserved that, you should feel this shame. And for a long time, I blocked out the idea that, like, as a creation of God, shame is not a quality I'm supposed to carry. It's not. We are not supposed to feel shame or guilt. We are supposed to feel conviction to change and be a better person and then move forward. But we're not supposed to carry these heavy feelings of shame and guilt. We're not. And so after I shared about what happened to me, like for the first time, and I brought it into the light, I felt God tell me, that's not a quality I want you to carry anymore. Release it. It wasn't your fault. You didn't deserve that. You didn't put yourself in that scenario, and you deserve to walk in freedom from it. And so from that moment, and honestly, I can remember like being in this abandoned bus in Haiti, and I was teaching English, which I don't know why anyone would have me teach English. I don't know if you hear my accent, but I'm very Southern. And I mean, by the end of it, all the women were saying y'all, and it was hilarious. But I would start to teach like part of like scripture and things that I was learning. And there's this part in John chapter 8, it's part of the Bible, that talks about a woman who was caught in adultery and dragged out into the middle of the street, and she was about to be stoned to death. And God, Jesus, steps in front of her and says, those who have cast the first stone, or those who have not sinned, cast the first stone. So he stands in front of her, protects her, and picks her up and says, keep moving forward. And I can remember being that woman. Now, I wasn't caught in adultery, but I mean, I did so many things that were just, and because of that act and that seed of worthlessness that was planted in me, I continued to give myself away to men who didn't deserve me. And it broke me over and over again. And so I related myself to these women in Haiti, and I said, that woman who was pulled out into the street, she did not grow up thinking, I'm going to be this woman who's an adulterer and living in this type of lifestyle. She didn't grow up. I didn't grow up being a little girl thinking this is what my life was going to look like. And so when I related that to them and I shared what had happened to me, I felt for the first time God move through me and say, I want to use your story and your pain to speak life into other people. And that's when the shame fell. It said, your story has a purpose. And purpose and shame doesn't coincide. If you have purpose, there's nothing that you should be ashamed of. If that part of that story that's happened in your life is called according to your purpose, then you can't walk in shame and really perform well in it. So when I realized that I could drop the shame and realize that what had happened to me could give glory to God and walk with him in it, and I didn't have to carry it anymore, it was the most freeing thing. And I'll tell you now, I really don't deal with shame. And it's my relationship with God and me realizing that I don't have to carry it anymore.
Oh, man, that is so powerful. And I think so many people are going to benefit from hearing that, because I think in some ways society's conditioned us that if you're not perfect, if you don't walk in perfection, not only are you rejected by society, but you're rejected by God. And so I think so many people tend to move away from religion just due to that alone, because the shame pushes you away. I know that was my journey with God, where I was so angry. I was so constantly in a place of, feeling unworthy. And I just thought, you know what, if I can't be this perfect person, then it means I can't be here. And I think the way you just explained it is just so beautiful. And I think so many people are going to sit and just think, wow, that is purpose. And you're, taking your pain and transforming it, I think is beautiful. And so I want to speak about your time in Haiti. And you touched on it. And all the women saying, y'all, I love it. I absolutely love it. But would you care to share, like, how was that journey for you? Because after you got out of, rehab, you went straight to Haiti. So how did that unfold for you, and what did you gain from it?
Well, so when I was in rehab, it was the first time, and this was the second time I'd gone to rehab. I went when I was 20, and then the last time I went was at 22. And that second time in rehab, I recognized what had happened to me. I had a counselor that was able to pour into me. Therapy is so important, and walk through, sexual abuse counseling. So I realized something had happened to me. I felt bad about it, but I knew that it wasn't my fault. But I was saying, how am I going to use, what do I do with this? God, how did you allow this to happen to me? So my dad had previously been down to Haiti, and what my dad did would go down and disciple young businessmen in Haiti and help them, give them the tools to gain employees, to grow their business. And so my dad really stewarded some really sweet relationships down there. And so he told me, he said, Carley, you don't need to go back into the world. You need to go to Haiti. You need to go serve. It has been set on the Carley show for 7 years. It's time to change the channel, which, and I don't take any shame in that. When you are in addiction, it is a very self-centered, what about me, my feet, and I get it. And there was nothing wrong with that. I had to go through a healing journey. But my first day in Haiti, I landed, and the leaders of the organization took me to a critical babies unit in the middle of Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And I was coming straight out of rehab, pretty much like a clinically medical rehab center, going straight into a hospital. And I said, well, what are we going to do here? And it'll make me emotional, but they said, we're going to go be with these children who are dying of AIDS. And I'm thinking, I'm a crazy person. How are you going to put me in a scenario? How could I help? And so, sorry, there's a car outside of my office. But so when I got there and I got into that critical babies unit, they go, there's this specific baby that we're taking care of, and his name is Ken. And they go, we would love for you to go in and just love on him and meet him. And I'm like, I had never thought I had been around anyone with AIDS. I was nervous, and I went in and I met him and his mother, Rosaline, and I bonded with him immediately. I picked him up out of his, and someone snapped a picture of us. And it became just kind of like me and him just had this super special relationship. And the leaders of the organization said, Carley, we've prayed about this, and we feel like you're supposed to love on Ken and take care of him and his mother every day and come into the hospital until, either he gets better, which is very unlikely, or until he passes away. And I'm thinking, how can someone who's so broken help someone else? I mean, I came from rehab. I was feeling broken. I knew that something had happened, but I didn't know how to fix it. And so I was like, okay, I'll do it. And so every day I would bring her food, his mom food, and I would sit in the hospital so she wouldn't be lonely, and then give her breaks, and I would just watch over Ken. And I would feel kind of God tell to me, pray over Ken. And I'd be like, what can my prayers do? I'm so broken. I can't heal anyone. And he would just say, pray. And every day I would pray, and every day I'd come in, and his oxygen tube would be taken out. I'd pray again. I'd come back. His feeding tube is taken out. I'd come back in. He's sitting up. He's eating. And every day I'd come in, and he would get better and better and better. And I remember coming in one day, and he was not in his crib. And I looked at the women in Haiti, and, I look really different from everyone there. And they're laughing at me because I can't speak Creole yet. I learned it later on, but I'm going, where's Ken? Where's Ken? And they don't know how to translate it truly to me. And they go, they point up. And I think, he died. He died. And they were like, no. Second floor, healthy babies. And I ran up the stairs, and I got to greet him, and he was healthy, and he was there with his mom. And I mean, something that when you're at a certain place with AIDS, I mean, it's almost impossible to reverse that process. And when I saw that healthy baby, God told me, if I can heal something that's impossible, are you going to trust me with your healing process? And I said, okay, God, let's do this. And then that's when I got to start teaching English, working with children in an orphanage. I got to watch the adoption process, which is like inspired me. I was an art teacher at an orphanage. I mean, it's like God used my creativity and all these things. And I got to meet artisans who made jewelry, and like my love of cultural decor, which you see all around me, came to life and got birthed in Haiti. My love for photography and storytelling. And then in that moment on the bus that I talked to you about, I can remember after I shared what had happened to me, I looked at the women and there was tears streaming down their faces, women from 14 to 70, 80 years old, who the exact same thing had happened to them. And I said, if you want this healing, we can pray this over your life. And women from 14 to 70 years old came up, and I got to lay my hands on them, and we got to pray for healing and restoration. And I'm like, this is what life is about. It's what life is about. And so, I mean, Haiti changed my life. When I'm ever having a hard day, I will remind myself the joy that the people of Haiti have, and they have nothing. And so it's a constant reminder for me that I would see little girls playing with stick dolls, having the time of their life and joy. And then when I start to feel sorry for myself, God will completely remind me, like, please don't forget where I brought you from. And I go, yes and amen. So, I mean, my time in Haiti changed me. I took mission trips. I now lead like studies of girls and like help them go through healing and reconciliation. And I actually took a group of girls down there. And a lot of them, it was their first time in a third world country and on a mission trip. So, I mean, Haiti changed my life. I wouldn't be the person I am without it.
Oh, man. As you were sharing your story, literally my skin was just like standing, and I was just like, whoa, you know, it's so incredible. And I'm almost speechless, because I think to myself how you refer to yourself, especially during that time, that I'm so broken, you know, and it was a mantra of sorts. It was like and it was something you believed at your core. And the fact that it managed to change, because God was like, hey, you know, if you refer to yourself as broken, and you can do this, and I can do this through you, then are you really broken? And I think it's just so beautiful, because which human being is not broken, right? By that mere definition. There's no human being I can think of, whether they're a billionaire or they're born in abject poverty, that does not feel something inside them is broken, or a dream is broken, or a relationship that was supposed to work is broken. And I just thank you for sharing, just so, you know, in such a vulnerable way, because I mean, I was transported to Haiti and I almost cried. I was like, whoo, child.
That's like, for me, like, and that's why when I say like I feel like I am a true storyteller, like, it's like I do believe like God created and allowed me to walk through this stuff so that I could have a purpose, like just like you, like, you know, like God allowed heartbreak, and it's hard to think that God allows it, but you know, people have free will and free choice to make mistakes and things like that, and He doesn't have the reign to make people do things. So I had to release that and realize it wasn't God's fault. I had to forgive God, you know? So I had that, why did you allow this to happen to me? How can you be good if these things happen? And He had to remind me, I don't take over the reins over people's free will. I give it to them freely so that they choose me freely. So it's like God didn't force me into a relationship with Him. He said, I want you to choose me because I want to have a relationship with you, but I won't force it. You know, and I think that's like typical in our world. I think, you know, how you said, like, we equate religion with shame, and see, it's like the complete opposite for me. And I am a very spiritual person, but for me, and that's how I present my faith, I would never like force my relationship with God on anybody else. I want people to choose Him freely, because I can remember accepting it into my life and having a physical, emotional, and spiritual change. And I want that for everyone, you know?
Wow. And so in Haiti, it was this time in your life where just so much was transforming for you. And you also happened to pick up your first camera, which has now become your career, you know? And I think that's also beautiful, because it's like this story that is, I don't know if you're familiar with Joseph Campbell's A Hero's Journey. And so he speaks about how the hero goes through, this huge trial and this battle, and there's this peak of light that the hero experiences, and then it goes full circle again until they get to the start. And I listen to your story, and I just think how you going to Haiti brought you to this very point where you and I are having a conversation. And so I want to know about, like, when you picked up that camera and you thought, I'm just going to snap pictures, around, and then it turned into a career. How did that happen? What was the progression of that?
Well, I'll tell you. There was the leader of the organization had a camera, and I kept taking it from her and taking pictures, because the women there and the children and the men, just, they were so beautiful in their stories, and I felt like I could capture their emotions from it. But I will give you a little backstory. Because of my addiction and all that and the tribulations I walked through, I did create a strained relationship with me and my parents, and still makes me emotional. But the leader of the organization reached out to my family and said, hey, Carley has really picked up a desire for taking photos. What if you guys came down here and surprised her and brought her a camera? And, I hadn't seen them. There was strife there. They were like, is she really going to change this time? And I remember my team told me, they're like, hey, we're going to pick up this team at the airport. Like, come with us. And I'm like, okay. I get to the airport, and it's my parents. Sorry. And they had a camera for me. And I said, how can you guys love me and forgive me after everything I put you through? And reward me. And they looked at me and they said, what are you talking about? You're our precious daughter. You were forgiven and is forgotten. And so that reminds me so much of you. And after that, it was this freedom to do something I loved, and I got to create and do beauty. And I transitioned that all the way. I took classes. I ended up going to, finishing college after Haiti down in Florida. And I took photography classes, and I actually did a testimonial photography documentary with my own personal story. And I just telling stories through the camera. And I photographed weddings, I photographed graduations, all these things. I just took pictures of whatever I could. And I ended up, when I first got married, having a home to call my own. And I felt I was so proud and so much ownership over it. I started to decorate it and photograph it as I saw in magazines. This is 6-7 years ago. And I was already working as a photographer, but not an interior photographer. And I just started to post on Instagram what I loved. And people would say, oh my gosh, you're an interior photographer. Can we hire you to come out? And I will tell you what, I did not know what I was doing. It was a fake it till you make it kind of moment. And I said, of course. And you know what? I had confidence. And that's where the shame, I was like, I'm not going to feel shame for not being an expert, but I'm going to learn. I'm going to push. I'm going to grow. I want to be the best at my craft. And that just hasn't stopped. And so, for 5 years, I picked up my camera every day. I take pictures every single day. I'm trying to grow knowledge. And so it kind of just started turning into this profession that Instagram started for me, and feeling like being proud and having ownership over a craft that was given to me out of forgiveness and reconciliation. It's just this full circle. I'll tell you what, that's how I know that there's a God, because I don't think these things can be orchestrated without him. But it's just been a journey. And now I have an office, and I get to travel around the world and photograph. Currently not doing that. But that's kind of the journey of photography and how it started in Haiti.
Oh, Carley, I keep wanting to move to the space where we're just speaking about light topics, and and then when you just share that story, I had to really push back the tears, and my eyes are still damp. I'm just oh my God.
I know, I'm the same. I'm a weak person, I'm sorry.
No, it's so beautiful. And I keep, finding myself being so just inspired as you share. It's so beautiful. And, for me, what I keep hearing in your story is just this incredible and beautiful story of just redemption, and also this, so many people commit suicide in today's day, and age, because of the pressures, right? We're surrounded by so much pressure, and we find ourselves at places in our lives where we think, I can never get through this. There's no ways I see a day better than today. Like, this is it for me. And I think the more you share your story and the more I listen to you, it just goes to that message that it's never late. It's never too late, right? And that's the beauty of your sharing. And I just want to thank you. Like, before we even move on, I just want to say thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh man.
Well, when I read about you this morning, I felt like, okay, then this is the avenue, like, I want to share. And most of my friends and family know that I'm super vulnerable with my story, and I always am, because I think vulnerability is like what, and stories are what pulls together. But I'll tell you, when I read your story and just how eloquently it was put and the way that you shared your story, I like felt like a spiritual bond to you reading it, because the way that you had to walk through forgiveness, I could totally be there with you. So you created an avenue for it. So I appreciate it.
No, thank you. It's so beautiful, because it also makes so much sense now when I look at your Instagram page. And, you know, we referred to this a little earlier in the interview about how I just felt at peace. Like, I would go through your like pictures and just, it would warm my soul. And, you know, Instagram is not really a place for soul warming. So the fact that I did find your page so like amazing. And you called it Sacred Spaces, which I think is also a book, the title of your new book that's coming out, right? Yes. And I'm so excited about that, because I think when you refer to sacred spaces, for me, it's a space where you can breathe and you can just be, right? And so when you called it Sacred Spaces, what were you thinking? Like, what did you want people to feel and see?
Well, the whole purpose of Sacred Spaces, and, you know, our book has really had to be put on hold. I mean, we were going to photograph around the world, different homes, and all of that. We were going to start traveling in May to photograph our first homes for the book, and our flight was canceled because of COVID. So, I mean, the book has been placed not on a shelf that's going to get dusty, but on a place where, like, we have to responsibly, like, take it on, like, when, you know, things start to release. But with my travels, and like, I've traveled and stayed at Airbnbs and different places, and because I am so vulnerable, I'll sit down with like my Airbnb owner and be like, so what's your story? I want to know about you. How'd you get an Airbnb? I mean, I am literally will make friends with, like, I don't care who you are, where you come from. I just love to hear people's stories. And so I ended up like meeting all these people on my travels, and every person that I met, I feel like was a godsend to me, because the things that they would share with me, like the openness of what they've walked through. And I mean, some of it is deep and traumatic, but turns into glory and gold. You know, it's like, it's just such good stuff. And I'm like, what am I going to do with all these beautiful stories and information? And what was not coincidental is that these beautiful stories coincided with beautiful homes. Now, it might not be a beautiful home to other people where it's like a $10 million house on Palm Beach, but the character and the placement and the peace that I found, where these homeowners came home and it was safe and they got to escape, and the anxieties of the world dropped as they entered into their doors, because it was a safe space and it was sacred to them. And for someone who struggled, like, the word home used to produce anxiety in me, because I moved 13 times during my addiction. People saying, hey, you gotta go. So like, it was unsettling. The fact that I'm able to buy a home now is one of the most humbling processes, and to create it sacred. So I knew I wanted to do something with that. And so I reached out to over, I think, 20 people who I'd met in my journeys, or people's Instagrams who had brought me kind of that fuzzy joy piece. And I saw it and I said, there's something different about them. And I jumped on a call just like this. I FaceTimed some of them strangers, some of them I knew, and I proposed my book, and they said, we'd love to be a part of it. Every single person, it was like lined up. And we got to share their stories. And that's what the book is going to be. It's going to be a dialogue of question and answer of the homeowners, and like what they've walked through, how it's transpired in their homes. And then each person will have like a separated, almost like devotional, where they are able to say, this is my quiet corner. This is where I meditate. This is my practice. And this is how I find peace in my sacred space. So when this idea like became birthed, and I talked to an agent and all of that, you know, I was nervous. I was like, is this a good idea? And the agent was like, I've never heard of a book like this before. And so it'll be an interior design book. So it'll be something beautiful that sits on your coffee table, but when you open it up, you're going to cry, which that's just, that's just kind of like the motive sometimes for me. Like, I don't want to make people cry, but when you like cry, there's like a release, like a physical release. And so that's kind of what the book is about.
Oh, I love it because, I mean, I think from this whole interview, you just have so much depth. You just have so much, like, you're so soul-centered, and it's so beautiful to be in the presence of and to listen to. Because I think, when you just hear interior styling or interior design, it can be very cold. It can be like, okay, well, it's going to be very modern or contemporary or this or that, right? You don't have a soul calling to interior spaces necessarily, And so when you have sacred spaces and you have these spaces that you feel resonate with your soul, but that aren't just spaces, that, as you said, is a home. And I think that's a beautiful thing, whereby I know for myself, having a home to call my own is also something that's very like, oh, what? I do stuff. I can put the chair there and no one's going to complain like anything. Wow.
Right. I know. I mean, I love that. I mean, it is interesting, the fact that, like, the fact that we have the freedom to decorate homes. And I think a lot of it that takes me back to like sacred spaces is, I mean, I do remember living in Haiti and like walking around tent camps after the hurricane hit them, or the earthquake. And so, and like people lost everything. And it's like, I think a lot of people think, well, I don't have a ton of money to decorate the way that I want. And so it doesn't take a lot of money to decorate one space. You can go, I mean, I would tell you, I will go to Goodwill or Salvation Army and buy an old chair and have it recovered and give it new life. Not everyone has that type of potential, but it doesn't have to be beautifully aesthetic to you. Some of that is because I'm an artist and I crave that, but sometimes it just needs to be a comfy chair, a cup of coffee, and a book. And like, you can find that quiet and sacred space for people. And I think people think it's this unapproachable idea that they can create for themselves. They have to have $1 million home. And it's like, sometimes the $1 million homes are the ones that feel very empty and cold and not sacred. So I don't know. It's interesting. Sometimes I have to kind of like pinch myself, like,
I love it. Speaking about sacred spaces, what does your sacred space encompass? Like, when you think, okay, I'm going to my sacred space now or in the next 30 minutes, what takes place in that, surrounding and in that space for you?
I think the first thing I have to do is, like, in an industry that I am in, I am constantly pulled in so many different directions by clients, by whether it's just, people working for me, things like that. So they're all good things. Some of them not, but it's this pull. So when I'm entering into that space where I know I need to feel freedom, I will clear my mind and drop everything, kind of like those bags. And I'm like, I'm not taking work home with me. And I'll go and I'll sit, and I usually have like a really comfy chair, like a chase lounge, something I can kind of spread out on. I'll have this is like my new thing because I am in recovery. Like, trust me, I used to love beer, and I was called a brewski, but kombucha, I just like love it. Because it kind of reminds me of a beer. So I'll sit there and I'll have a kombucha and I'll just unwind and I'll process and I'll pray. But a lot of it, I'm just meditating on the day and be like, wow, I'm so grateful for this. I am so grateful for this. And, for me, I like to have things that are like inspiring around me. You see, I have like art and things like that. For me, my sacred space, like I kind of need it to be visually beautiful, but some people's might be nature sitting on a log, so it's different for every person, but that's kind of what my sacred space would be. Just like that really cozy chair, sitting with like a nice cold drink and like dropping everything and all the worries I had that day. And sometimes my husband will want to come talk to me. I'm like, I need a minute, and he's like, oh, okay. It's that time. And I'm like, yes. It's like, we need it. I mean, the anxiety of today's world is never ending, and we need a place to be able to drop it at the door,
Oh, I agree. I agree. You mentioned something about imposter syndrome in one of your posts. And I know I've suffered from it. And I'm like, I've been in places sometimes and I'm just like, why did you get me to come here? Like
Yeah.
I'm not a Harvard professor. I don't even know what you want me to speak about right now. And I'll just be like, oh God.
Feeling.
Exactly. So how are you working through imposter syndrome? How are you feeling today versus, yesterday or the day before or the day before?
It's a daily struggle for sure. I think sometimes because I did come from, 9 years ago, like that lifestyle, and now, I'm here. And 9 years is a good chunk of time. So it did take me time to get to where I'm at. But I think sometimes I'm like, why do people follow me? I'm not very good. Like, I suck, or why did this person call me and hire me as their client or as their designer, things like this. And I have to constantly remind myself, and this is where that shame and purpose comes into line, that I've been created for a purpose and God wants me to shine out of that purpose. Like, that's the point of life. And so I have to remember that, like, when I'm being told I'm an imposter, I'm being lied to. And so I'm not an imposter. I'm here for a purpose. I was placed in this moment, in this time, for such a time as this. And so if I listen to the lies that I'm imposter, I can't work in the passion of my purpose. And so to me, I call it the enemy. Like, I feel like a lot of the lies that we hear are the exact truth that God wants us to know. So, like, when I hear a lie about myself, I have to go, rude. Let me find the balance of what the truth is of that. Because the exact lie that the universe, the enemy, tells us about ourselves is exactly what he doesn't want us to flourish in. Because when we flourish in it, we bring hope to other people. When we flourish outside of imposter syndrome, we give hope. And so that's kind of like the motive of my life, is like to walk through life and show women that you can come from this and pursue your dreams. Don't listen to the lie. And really, it's the lie of the world. The world tells us that we're not good enough. I mean, the world is the one that whispers so often to me, is like, well, you're not as good as them. Your stuff doesn't look as fancy as theirs. And then God goes, for such a time as this, you were created in this moment, for this time, for this client, and you are not an imposter. So I have to, like, erase the imposter with truth about myself.
You said something so incredibly powerful. And that is, when you shine in what, the world tells you can't, or the enemy, or you give hope. And that's exactly it, and you just gave me an aha moment. And I think you've given me so many throughout this interview where I'm just like, this conversation is honestly just, been so good for my own soul. And I think, when you just reframe your experience, instead of believing everything you hear or everything that's around you, and saying, oh, pause, is this true? If so, how is it true? And then how do I either fix it and change it, or how do I just eliminate it? Because most of the time when someone say, oh, you suck, or, someone is attacking you on social media or whatever the case is, first, the place they're coming from is probably from a place of pain. And you have to understand that and say, they don't know me. They really don't.
Yes.
Okay. No, I was just, saying that, it's so important to sometimes understand that even when it is a physical person who is saying mean-spirited things, they're coming from a place of pain. And so you have to be able to be objective enough to say, it's got nothing to do with me. And that voice of unworthiness will be like, it's got everything to do with you. But you have to say, no.
That happened yesterday.
Oh, no.
It happens on the daily. But what's interesting is a lot of my inner critic is, and like the words that I hear, I'm at my office and people are like walking by and waving at me. A lot of the inner critic I hear is my own personal issue of not being perfect. And so, like, I can remember my counselor telling me in rehab, saying, I would say, my parents just wanted me to be perfect. And he goes, did they ever say that? And I go, well, no, they never told me that, but I knew that. He goes, or was it your false idea and expectation of yourself that you never met? And I was like, whoa, I had all these false expectations of myself that I thought people had of me. when it was this inner perfectionist inside of me and I wasn't meeting my own expectations. And then I finally had to go, I'm not going to have an expectation of myself. I'm going to work out of my gifts, and from that flows what's supposed to, you know?
Oh, that is powerful. Powerful.
It's hard though.
No, but it's so powerful. The intention is what matters. When you have that intention, it consistently manifests, right? You have to continue doing it. And so I want to take us back and say, if you could give 18-year-old Carley any advice in the world, what would you say?
That'll make me teary just thinking about it. That life was going to get better, and that I had a purpose, that I was chosen for something wonderful, that I just couldn't see it. I think a lot of 18-year-olds look at Instagram and they think that they just want Instagram fame and all of these things. And I'll tell you, I did not start my Instagram journey for followers. I started doing what I love and I pursued it and I was passionate about it, and God allowed it to grow. But I wish at 18, instead of trying to seek the world's approval, like I tried to seek the world's approval in the way that I dressed. I wanted men to look at me. It was this craving of attention. And I wish I just would go back and tell myself that you have a purpose, and it's not what the world tells you is purpose, you know?
Wow. That is so incredibly powerful. Carley, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for the light you are in the world. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for sharing of yourself so freely. I will be changed by this conversation, that's for sure. And and I'm so sure people listening to this will be changed by this. You are such a light in your gift in just every way, not just in your professional talent, but in the person you are today and the person you were then, because it lended to being you today. And yeah, honestly, there's just not enough words for me to just express my gratitude to you for who you are and who you're going to continue to be. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, honestly, I'm just honored that you asked me to do it, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. And I feel like you giving yourself this type of platform to share and like to be vulnerable, because not all platforms I've been on have given me the ability to be vulnerable and ask me thought-provoking questions. And I just want to thank you because you are a light. So I'm just grateful, and I just want to be friends.
Yes, please. please be my friend. I don't want to sound
encourage sisters. Like if you're going through a hard time, just let me know, and I'm just gonna like speak life into your situation. So know that I'm here for that too.
Oh, thank you, Carley. And same goes both ways. It's so beautiful. It's rare to meet someone that really does, like impact my soul this way. So yes, I will take you up on that. We just expect. Wow. I had to take a second before editing this interview because it just resonated so deeply with me, and I felt so changed by it that I needed to sit in that energy. I really hope that Carley touched you and impacted you the way she did me. Share your favorite quotes with us, and please keep up with Carley. She's incredibly inspiring. All her Instagram and website details will be in the bio. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for the love and the support, and I will see you next week.